Yeah.
I'll just share the screen. Just wait.
Oh, that can be done. And now there is a formal introduction. You can do that. We will do in between. Meanwhile, we will do this.
Okay.
You keep doing that. Okay.
Okay.
Now over to Dr. Prasanna. We can start, Dr. Prasanna.
Okay, ma'am. So, the outset, I wish everyone a very good morning. And I take this opportunity to welcome the resource person for the day, Ishita Mukhodhyapai, the professor at Calcutta University, for this webinar come course on gender and development, being jointly organized by BEC, that is Bharadasan University Entrepreneurship, Innovation and Career Hub, and the Department of Women's Studies, Bharadasan University. So I extend a warm welcome to you, madam, on my behalf and on behalf of Bharadasan University. Welcome. And next, I welcome Dr. Manimeghla ma'am, the co-organizer of this program, Professor Department of Women's Studies of our university. And I also extend a warm welcome to all the participants who have joined and who will be joining shortly also. So I extend a warm welcome to all of them on behalf of Bharadasan University. And over to Dr. Manimeghla ma'am, who will formally introduce the resource person and carry on proceedings. Thank you. Manimeghla ma'am, your mic, ma'am.
Mic audio is.
Yeah. So I thank Dr. Prasanna for all support being extended and also attending the technical flaws. If there is any, I think he will do it tomorrow. Yesterday he will do it tomorrow, today also. And so we have our resource person with us today, Professor Ishita Mukhodhyapai, a popular teacher, researcher, and an activist. She is currently a professor of economics and the founder director of in Center for Women Development Research there in Calcutta University. And she'll be talking on engendering labor economics. That is the need of our. We need to engender the entire discipline, the curriculum of whatever the discipline may be, not necessarily economics. And that would really take forward the issues of the people who have been excluded from the theories, from the policies, etc. And so we were talking about gender, and it includes men, women, trans, LGBT, etc. And also the marginalized who have been facing the issues of exclusion, neglect, etc. So when we talk about economics, there are four factors of production in land, labor, capital, and organization. Generally, we talk about these factors, and labor is one of the major factors and the input. When we talk about labor and labor theories, I wonder whether the theory, when formulating the theories, the authors, the contributors have really kept in mind men and women and other transgender, etc. And because we didn't have any base in the beginning, like the other days also we discussed that men were there in the public life and making policies, and therefore theories also went like that. So that is what we are going to talk in today, and time and again it has been established that inclusion of women and other gender and the marginalized have contributed positively to development, particularly when it comes to women. The gender biases, addressing the gender biases necessarily will lead to the kind of positive development in terms of the family welfare, the child health, the education, and the overall atmosphere and decision making also, bringing a gender sensitiveness. So we have, I really take the privilege to introduce our resource person today, Dr. Ishita, who is a close friend of mine, and we are working together in the Indian Association for Women's Studies. She is a successor of my me, where she took over the treasurership. Formerly I was there, and now I'm joint secretary and the joint secretary, and she is the treasurer. And she specialized in development economics, mathematical economics, labor economics, gender and development, very important area. And she has established the Department of Economics there in Calcutta University. When you visit there, you will feel the academic atmosphere. It is entire. It is like a college. The department goes like a college. It is not simply a department. So many establishments, branches, and she has been working intensively on the areas of labor with the national and international collaborations. She was the coordinator of Indian Women Entrepreneurship Program, where she collaborated with the other universities. She conducted more than 20 major research projects on the areas of gender, child marriage, informal sector labor, urban informal sector, women and political participation, health, drinking water, trafficking, entrepreneurship, etc. So, wide range of areas in which she really worked on that. And being an activist, she could learn from the field and take it forward to her own theory formulation, and also supported by both international and national organizations for these research projects, including British Council, Swiss Federal Institute, DFID, etc. She also widely publishing, and most of the papers have been published in EPW. You know, EPW is an established, well-recognized critical analysis bringing journal, and she has been a regular contributor to that. And she writes on urban informal sector, globalization, factor market, changes in South Asia, pricing policy, emerging market for agriculture, rural labor market, gender, wage gap, etc. And as I already pointed out, she is equally an activist and travels across the country to interact with the grassroots and associated with various women's movements, and a strong theoretician, quantitative economist, gender expert, policy analyst. And so she'll be talking on this important topic today. And we try to establish with the collective bargaining power being increasing with the women, it is imperative to incorporate the gender needs, and whether it is the development context or in the labor context. And you cannot ignore the participation of women, particularly in the export processing zones. More and more women are joining. In certain contexts, feminization of labor is taking place, and therefore there is a need to re-examine the gender biases in the theories, and try to contribute to gender inclusive theories. So that is what Professor Ishita will be talking today on gendering labor economics. So over to Ishita. Welcome, Ishita. On behalf of all the participants, I welcome you. And you can go till 11:55, and then there will be interactions. I also welcome all the participants. Ishita.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Now I'll be sharing my slide. I'll be sharing my slide just. Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
You can.
Actually, I'm talking about engendering labor economics. It's a post-COVID-19 introspection. Now, I'll tell you what I'm trying to do and what has been going up in my mind throughout these pandemic days. As I'm working on and teaching labor economics, looking at labor, so whether we would be able to look at labor in the same way in which we used to do it earlier, that is my concern. And I'm just sharing with you my ideas, my thought, and what others and what is happening in the whole world. I'll take in the global scenario, and then I'll talk about India later on. Now, motivation is that we are exposed to a pandemic in a global context, but our global economy is ruled by neoliberal state structure. Now, neoliberal economic policies look at labor and capital, look at the relationship between labor and capital in terms of the financial capital. And when we say globalization, which is the most common term as far as the neoliberal state structure is concerned, if we look at globalization, that goes with privatization and financialization. But where is labor in this? Where is labor in all these words? Labor is subordinate to all of these processes. None of this process could have been executed. I say could have been because I'm talking about the world in the pre-pandemic situation. None of the policies could have been executed without including labor and without labor power. Financialization and neoliberal relation unpacked labor in terms of its relation to production. Now, what has been done is that it unpacked labor, it dissociated labor, and as if it is looking upon labor as a commodity, not looking at the socio-economic structural problems embedded into it. So here is my motivation that this is how economics has been looking at it. So the questions that I'm trying to share with you is when we find neoliberalism had ended in a financial crisis in 2007-8. This was followed by massive labor unemployment in different countries of the world. Even when we saw that labor unemployment was happening, the whole idea of the neoliberal state was how to keep the capital, the profiteering class intact, and how to keep this capital intact. Now, what do I mean by how to keep capital intact? Do I mean investment? Yes, I mean investment, but investment in a way which is not augmenting labor. So even after labor unemployment, even after financial crisis, neoliberalism didn't bother to learn. So we didn't change our theoretical structure. We didn't change our textbooks. We didn't make any change there. We saw that the crisis never ended when the world is faced with the pandemic. So we were within a steep deflationary situation in various parts of the world that didn't stop with economics, that also saw the political economic changes between the different power structures in the entire world. The US, with its racist approach, came up very much crudely even before the pandemic, throughout the pandemic. And this was happening even after 2007-8. We saw rise of Brexit. We saw in Brazil an authoritarian regime. We saw the climate activists focusing on some of the problems that were entering during this point of time. So after 2007-8 crisis also, we didn't change our textbooks. We didn't change the way in which we didn't change the neoliberal economic ideas. Question is, what will happen to the labor and gender question now in the post-pandemic world with respect to the theoretical understandings of the labor economics? Now, we didn't change. The position that I'm starting with is that we didn't change the labor-gender relations in the way our textbooks was required to be reoriented after the financial crisis. But now we are entering a crisis. We are in the middle of a crisis that is more than the global financial crisis. So where is gender in the mainstream labor economics? Two strands of analysis exist in the literature. One is the labor behaving within a market like any other commodity in terms of labor demand and labor supply. And in fact, if you put the whole entrepreneurship question, it is like that. It is totally not looking into the labor demand. The whole problem of entrepreneurship in many points of time, what has been mentioned right from the initial days with respect to small entrepreneurs, is the marketability. So that it has been moved in terms of demand, labor demand, and mostly female labor demand, that there is a problem in the female, there is a problem in the demand, but there is a huge level of supply. So although there is a mismatch located in the supply and demand, but our textbooks didn't change. The other approach, the other strand of analysis looks into labor in the framework of social stratification. Look into the sociological aspect of the labor. While gender has become accommodated as a category in the demand supply approach, where it's only male female labor, gender as a category, by distinguishing between male and female labor markets, this social stratification approach looks into more into the sexual division of labor and subordination or discrimination of female labor. And mostly feminists entered here. Feminists had a strong literature as far as the gender labor is concerned. So this was gender in our what is known as, what can be called MLE, that mainstream labor economics. Now, gender labor relations in theory. In 2006, Fleetwood mentioned that labor markets are exhausted by social structures like gender subordination and discrimination. Labor markets are central to the neoliberal agenda, which I started with this fact that nothing could have been done without labor. So this has been very central. But on the underlying structure is of a gender subordination and discrimination. Various issues came up. I'm talking of the issues later. Feminists provided insights into the theory of paid and unpaid labor, the sexual division of labor, embeddedness of the sociology of gender in labor economics. Beneria talked about it, Fober talked about it, Nancy Fober. Now, in 1884, Frederick Engels clearly talked about female labor. And what is female labor in origin of private property and state, family and state? So as you can see, the origin of private property, it was clearly related to that female labor, family labor is the origin of the female labor. And female labor is related to private property, though it is not related, it was not related at that point of time to accumulation of capital. But what we saw in the neoliberal agenda, that female labor was clearly related to accumulation of capital, not of capital per se, which is leading to productive accumulation of the assets. But what we saw is a speculative gain in capital gains. So female labor has been used to make capital gains by the corporates. And the sexual division of labor continued. People talked about the private sphere and the public sphere, but the public sphere was also privatized in that sense, if we look into the factor. Now, issues in gender labor economics, what we were faced with. The issues that were discussed mostly included, and we had several PhDs on that wage discrimination, unpaid family labor, migration, and it came up in large ways as far as India is concerned now. Whenever we will remember a few years later, any picture of the pandemic, any picture of COVID-19, the picture that will remain in our minds is how the migrant laborers walked in with their families and several women had to deliver their babies on the road. So this memory will be there in the minds of everybody who is in our country today. This is a strong memory which has made clear marks. It's a marker of pandemic as far as India is concerned. So we know migration and female migration, stereotyping of jobs, the health workers, the nursing jobs, as you can see, ASHA workers. So if this is stereotyping, that is the care services are stereotyped and stereotyping, and there are many others. The question is, what has happened in gender labor relations with the experience of the COVID pandemic? Is our labor economics going to change? Will the feminist questions on the labor gender questions which have been raised for a long period of time is going to see its entry into textbooks of economics post-pandemic situation? This is a thought that I'm going to share with you today. Now, if it is going to enter, what will be entering and how it will be entering? So how can we engender the labor economics? That is what I'm discussing today. Now, labor gender relations in post-COVID situation. What are the learnings from this? What we couldn't explain as far as the looking into gender as a category in the demand supply framework of labor market. Commodified labor, what commodified labor could not explain. What has happened? Women's unpaid and underpaid work stress has increased. Now, see, we don't have the whole level of data now regarding the pandemic. Whatever we have several reports, a few data. We only have the data of the incidence of the disease. UN Women in its report is telling us in the earlier June that half of the global population has been confined to homes. So when half of them are confined to homes, underpaid and unpaid domestic work is really on the rise for women. It's also recording that most of the healthcare workers are women. Care workers are within essential services. So those whom you are visible working as frontline workers, a bulk of them are women workers. So women are working indoors, women are working outside. ILO has told us that women spend 4.1 times more times than men in Asia and Pacific. Sexual division of labor has become more skewed in terms of women. So we have more women working indoors and more women working outdoor also. And this has happened throughout the world. So how are we accommodating this in terms of demand-supply structure? Discrimination against domestic workers. But as you can see, the domestic workers are losing jobs. Massive amount of job loss. And domestic workers who was in the market, as far as care workers are concerned, they have lost jobs. And domestic workers are getting pay cuts. You may record that there has been a statement by the government that their pay protection will be done, not by the government, but it was left to the people of the country. It was left to its employers. But that order was withdrawn later. This is an example to show that although disease vulnerability is higher with respect to men in the whole world, I'm talking about the whole world, time to time referring to India. to show similarities as well as the dissimilarities. Economic hardships are more with respect to women. So if you look into the virological and epidemiological studies, it shows that men are more affected than women. But if you go into the economic hardships, the vulnerability and affectedness of women is much more than men, as far as the gender labor relations are on the rise. So because men are vulnerable, because men are out, because men have lost jobs, the whole economic brunt of the family has to be borne by the women. So we find in World Bank is stating in a report that economic hardships, as far as economic vulnerability, this has gone with respect to women. And this has gone to redefine the gender labor relations. It's not the old relations, but it is just a reinforcement of the old kind of questions that feminists were asking. So the questions that feminists were asking was that the mainstream neoclassical theory is not being helping us to understand the labor gender relations. What we see in the post-COVID situation, the pandemic has exposed this. Pandemic has brought out much hidden facts. So this entire critique was sidelined by the traditional mainstream economic theory. It was not into the textbooks. When we saw into the textbooks, what entered into the textbooks is a theory that Baker involved into, is a theory that many others were involved into. It's just a categorization. It is just add women and star kind of a thing, that if you talk about plantations workers, what is the plight of women plantation workers? It's like this. But the relations with respect to productions, the whole reorientation of the productive space, the whole reorientation of the labor as a process, the whole reorientation of the labor power gender into the factor. This reorientation has been exposed with the pandemic, with the economic vulnerability being higher with respect to women. Now, job loss and increase of vulnerable jobs. ILO is telling us that the workplace closures due to lockdown has meant an approximate working hour loss of 130 million full-time jobs. It's on the entire world. This was what has happened in the first quarter. In the next few months, the next quarter, this job loss will be of 305 million full-time jobs. I'm not talking of the numbers. I'm just looking at the increase. The increase from 130 million to 305 million. What will it be after that? Because will there be a recovery or will there not be a recovery? That's another question. But the job loss, you have to admit the massive extent of job loss, which the world didn't witness, even after the global financial crisis, even after the earlier crisis. So is this the same as Great Depression? We don't know. Or more than that, people are telling that it's more than that. USA, Europe, and Central Asia will experience the greatest loss in working hours. Now, I'm talking about this is what is happening to the developing world, what is happening to the poor countries. Now, vulnerability will increase more for the own account workers, for the small enterprises and informal economy. Why the vulnerability will increase? Because what is happening with this job loss, there has to be a survival strategy of this for families. And if you look into the survival strategies, the own account workers, small enterprises, informal economy will have to change its orientation to moving into the more global poverty. That is, they will be more steeped in vulnerability and poverty, but it is the only way to exist or for survival. Now, the situation in India